to a full-on child. Yes, he does. The way you squeeze and tease knocks me to my knees. I'm smoking, baby.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Oh, hold on. Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to another edition of Quick Trivia with Mike. It's the weekly game show right here on Channel 955, where we test your knowledge of facts. Sometimes a little bit more historic in nature, sometimes very contemporary. Hopefully, always a lot of fun. I am your host and the quiz master, Mike Brever. Let's sit back, relax, and have a little bit of fun this next half hour, shall we? As you saw when we began the show, face masks are back for staff here at East Castle Place. Hopefully not for too long, though. I've talked to Tyler recently, and he said that when the incidence of coronavirus recedes here in Milwaukee County, we're going to lift that order again. Of course, the order isn't in place for you, our residents. You can walk around without face masks anywhere you want, unless you go up into the healthcare center visiting a loved one. Then, of course, masks and goggles still prevail. So for now, staff in Independent have to wear face masks, but hopefully only for 2 or 3 weeks, and then we'll be able to see everybody's great smile all over again. You know, we have a new tradition here at Quick Trivia, and that's birthdays of the week. We have a couple this week that I want to point out to you. Hold on, let me check this phone call. I'm going to have to leave that phone ring because you are much more important than them. We do have a couple birthdays this week. We're going to begin with Nancy Setlock on May 26th. We also have Betty Gore on May 28th. There, we sent it to voicemail. That should take care of it. Again, Betty Gore on May 28th. Happy birthday to you two birthday kids. If you happen to see either one of these two lovely ladies in the corridors over the next week or so, be sure to wish them a happy birthday. And wish them a happy birthday from all of us here at Quick Trivia as well. You know, this week we had a very special live edition of Quick Trivia. We were down in Lindsay Hall on Wednesday, and we were testing some of your neighbors on some of the cognitive things that people need to be aware of in order to keep their brain functioning strong. The types of activities you can do, the types of food you can eat. We had a lot of fun. There's been talk that maybe we'll do some live editions of Quick Trivia again in the future. We'll keep you posted. I know I had a lot of fun, and I think it'll be a lot of fun for all of you. And maybe for this show, we'll have a live audience at some time in the future. We'll keep you posted. Well, you know by now how the game is played. We give you 3 questions every week, and we challenge you to come up with the answers. We begin our show by giving you the 3 answers from last week. Take a brief intermission, then we give you 3 new questions for the coming week. Sometimes we spice up the show a little bit with a guest host. This week we don't have one. We were trying to get one and it just didn't work out. But we'll have a guest host for you next week. I think they really add a little something, and I'm sure you get bored just listening to me on a regular basis drone on for half an hour. We'll see if we can get someone to spice it up a little bit. Let's take a look at the 3 questions from last week, shall we? We began last week by taking a look at World War II and its effects on society. You know that World War II began for the United States on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor. But in many ways, the world was already at war and society was already affected by it. We were deeply involved in a Lend-Lease program with Britain. We were trying to stave off Japanese expansion in the Pacific. Society was already adapting to that, with factories transitioning over to war materials instead of making cars and things like that. But after December 7th, things changed even more. Within a matter of years, 25 million men bore arms for the United States, fighting the Axis powers. There also was a host of women who played roles in the military as well. Some of them were trainer pilots, and there were WACs, and there were nurses that went overseas within miles of the front lines treating our wounded soldiers. But even here at the home front, you hear words like Rosie the Riveter, women going into the factories because of the displacement of the male workforce. Hollywood really gearing up. A lot of their movies focused on supporting the war effort. Go back and look at some of those old movies from the 1940s. They are fascinating about how subtle messages were put into those movies. And actually maybe not even so subtle. During the 1940s and World War II, there was a very clear delineation between right and wrong. And we didn't have to couch messages in subliminal messaging. It was right out there in front of you. We talked about victory gardens, people growing vegetables in their backyards because we were shipping so much food overseas for our fighting forces over there. There were rubber drives. There were paper drives. All kinds of things that our society took on to try to support the war effort. I asked you about a very particular one. There was nationwide gas rationing. The Indianapolis 500 did not take place during the war years. Banning of new car sales. However, a very special one that I asked you about, a victory speed limit was put into effect. And I asked you, what was the victory speed limit? Well, even back in the 40s, cars could go freeway speeds, 50, 60, 70 miles an hour. But we all know the faster you go, the more gas you burn. Well, a victory speed limit was implemented. It started in 17 states and it eventually went nationwide. 35 miles per hour to save gas, because all of those oil resources were needed for our efforts overseas. So there you have it. The victory speed limit was 35 miles per hour, and that was the answer to question number 1. Question number 2, we took a little bit of a look at Renaissance art, and specifically one of the most gifted artists that the world has ever known, Michelangelo. Born in the Republic of Florence on March 6, 1475, passed away on February 18, 1564. Really was an archetypal Renaissance man. Some of his most famous works that you know of, the Pieta, the statue of the Virgin Mary holding Jesus after he's taken down from the cross, a beautiful rendering. He also did the ceiling in the Sistine Chapel. Really reinforced his relationship with the church in those days. He did a lot of things for churches and because of the church. You know, in those days, the Catholic Church really dominated society. It also was still somewhat of a military force between alliances and its own arms. The Catholic Church really played a dramatic role in society. Possibly the most famous artwork that he ever did was the statue of David, completed by Michelangelo in 1504, one of obviously his most renowned works. It was originally done, it was commissioned by the Florence Cathedral, the cathedral in Florence. However, it actually never moved into the Florence Cathedral. It was, upon completion, placed in the Piazza della Signoria. It was eventually moved in 1873 to the Accademia Galleria in Florence. A replica was actually placed in the Piazza della Signoria in 1910, but that's just a replica. I asked you, why was the sculpture of David never placed in the Florence Cathedral? Now you remember last week I had a guest host. I had Lila Kirk here. After the show went off the air, she theorized that it was never moved into the Florence Cathedral because it potentially was somewhat offensive to the church. You remember that the statue of David, which was taken, it's a replica of David after he slew the giant Goliath. And it's a nude replica of David, and it is quite detailed in its physical form. She thought that may have been a little bit too strong, if you will, to be placed inside a Catholic church. Well, that actually is not the answer why it never appeared in the Florence Cathedral. The reason is that when it was done, it was a 6-ton statue. A 6-ton statue. It was originally commissioned to be at the top of the cathedral. There was no way to move it there. He carved the statue in place, and that's where it stayed. It was just too big to move. Something no one ever thought of until May 18th, 1504, when they decided to try to move it into the cathedral. That, my friends, is the answer to question number 2. Question number 3, we took a little bit of a look at somewhat contemporary American politics. Dan Quayle, born February 4th, 1947, American politician who served as the 44th Vice President of the United States. You know, he served under George H.E.W. Bush. George H.E.W. was the Vice President to Ronald Reagan, and he served between Reagan and Clinton. He only served one term. Quayle, of course, was world-renowned for many of the things he said that were just nonsensical. He'd get caught up in the moment, and he talked quicker than his brain could process what he wanted to say. And things came out that made absolutely no sense. He one time went to a spelling bee as a judge. As vice president, on June 15, 1992, he told a 12-year-old student, William Figueroa, that the correct spelling of potato, P-O-T-A-T-O, was P-O-T-A-T-O-E. You know, he was ridiculed mercilessly for this. Saturday Night Live had a weekly routine about him and the things that he used to say. Of course, he actually was a brilliant man, and he just had a habit of saying some confounding things from time to time. George H.E.W. knew that this was going on, and he knew that it was an extremely tough time for his vice president, and he took great sympathy on him, and he had great empathy for what the press was doing to him as a result of this. And he wanted to show Dan Quayle that he had great support for him. He wanted to show the nation that he had faith and trust in Dan Quayle, in his maturity and his sense of responsibility. Dan Quayle said that as a result of this, and to show the nation what was going on, he offered to give Dan a token of his appreciation. And I asked you, what was this token of his appreciation? According to Dan Quayle, he asked Dan if he would like a puppy. To show the world that Dan Quayle was a man of maturity and he had a great sense of responsibility, he offered to give him a puppy. I am not certain that was the symbolic token that Dan Quayle was looking for to demonstrate his maturity. But he and George H.W. Bush were, kind of a unique combination. Wonderful men in their own right, but the press had a field day with them. There you have it. Those are our 3 questions from last week and the answers. I hope you had fun playing that game. We're going to take a brief intermission now. We're going to come back in the second half with our 3 new questions for this coming week. I encourage you to go get a little bit of brain food, a cup of coffee, maybe a donut. I think these are going to be a lot of fun for you, but they are definitely going to be some teasers. So hurry back, I'm going to be waiting right here.
One last question. Suppose, Lord Russell, this film were to be looked at by our descendants, like a Dead Sea Scroll in 1,000 years' time. What would you think it's worth telling that generation about the life you've lived and the lessons you've learned from it?
I should like to say 2 things. One intellectual and one moral. The intellectual thing I should want to say to them is this. When you are studying any matter or considering any philosophy, ask yourself only what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out. Never let yourself be diverted either by what you would wish to believe or by what you think could have beneficent social effects if it were believed. But look only and solely at what are the facts. That is the intellectual thing that I should wish to say. The moral thing I should wish to say to them is very simple. I should say, love is wise, hatred is foolish. In this world, which is getting more and more closely interconnected, we have to learn to tolerate each other. We have to learn to put up with the fact that some people say things that we don't like. We can only live together in that way. And if we are to live together and not die together, we must learn a kind of charity and a kind of tolerance, which is absolutely vital to the continuation of human life on this planet.
Welcome back to the second half of our show. I hope you had a little bit of brain nourishment there, a donut, a cup of coffee, because we've got some great questions for you here in the second half. I am your host and the Quizmaster, Mike Brever. Sit back, relax. Let's have a little bit of fun, shall we? We're going to begin by taking a little bit of a look at the entertainment industry. You know, we've done this a lot. Today we're going to take a look at NBC, the National Broadcasting Company. I actually thought all along it was the National Broadcasting Corporation, but it's the National Broadcasting Company. It's an English language commercial broadcast television and also actually radio network, serving as the flagship property of NBC Entertainment. It's headquartered at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. And some of their talk shows still actually emanate from 30 Rockefeller Plaza in New York City. It also has offices at 10 Universal City Plaza in Los Angeles. And in Chicago, it has an office at the NBC Tower. Sometimes referred to as the Peacock Network, in reference to its stylized peacock logo, which was introduced in 1956. Today, NBC has 13 owned and operated stations and nearly 200 affiliates throughout the United States. It also is available in Canada, Mexico, and actually South Korea and Germany by pay-per-view. So it really is a worldwide entertainment thing today. Currently, New Jersey is the only state in the United States that does not have a locally licensed affiliate, and that's primarily because New Jersey can pick up the New York airwaves. But it truly is an entertainment phenomenon. It's a global powerhouse in the entertainment industry. We talked a couple minutes ago about the peacock and how it became symbolic with NBC. There actually were two reasons why it was introduced on May 22nd, 1956. Its first was it wanted to promote the fact that it now was airing color programs. The peacock, a multicolored feathered bird, was very prominent on its airwaves as its logo, and it promoted the fact that it was in color. There also, however, was a very subliminal reason why NBC chose to have a colored peacock as its logo, beginning in 1956. My question to you, what was the more subliminal reason why NBC chose a peacock as its logo in 1956? That is question number one. Question number two, we're going to take a little bit of a look at the history of the United States and labor. Specifically, we're going to take a look at children in the labor market. Children, or the use of children as servants and apprentices, has been practiced throughout much of human history, but reached a zenith during the Industrial Revolution. It was because of the fact that we were still primarily an agrarian society, but factories were located in cities, and there wasn't enough of a workforce there. Plus, children didn't cost as much as adults to work. There were miserable working conditions during the Industrial Revolution. Crowded, unclean factories, a lack of safety codes, no legislation to protect children, long hours were the norm, and of course, crucially, children could be paid less. During my live and in-person trivia show on Wednesday, we talked about the fact that children in cities especially, and rural areas, in the latter part of the 19th century, very large families, 10, 12 children. Children were actually part of the income for a family. So as soon as children could go off to work, they did, because the family needed sustenance. And it really wasn't until a child was 21, until they were actually earning their own money. Immigration also led to a large source of child labor. The Irish potato famine in the 1840s Irish moved to lower level factory jobs when they first got here. It was a way to become indoctrinated in American society. Get a place to live, earn an income, have your children help with the income. From 1902 to 1915, however, society started to realize that child labor really was something that needed to be regulated, because they were really starting to be victimized by these robber barons, if you will. Child labor committees started to be formed, and Congress started to pass laws as early as 1916, 1918. However, initially, the Supreme Court ruled most of those laws unconstitutional. That led to a constitutional amendment, and that took the teeth out of the Supreme Court trying to ban some of these things. The Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938 really finalized everything. That all came under FDR's New Deal. My question to you, as factories multiplied in urban settings, the mid-1800s and early 1900s, again, children were a very prevalent form of the workforce. In 1900, according to the United States Census, what was the percent of all American workers, the percent of all American workers who were under the age of 16? What was the percent of all American workers under the age of 16? So 15 and under. That, my friends, is question number 2. I'll just tell you, kind of a shocking number. Our third question goes back to 17th century history, but it's Australian history. We're going to take a look at a phenomenon in history that really dramatically affected Australia. European rabbits coming to the continent of Australia. They were introduced in the 18th century, the 1700s, with the first fleet. The problem is, they were initially introduced because it was thought that, it would be fun to create a new species for hunting. The rabbits would be there. They wouldn't necessarily be aggressive animals, but they could be a nice hunting animal. Well, unfortunately, there were no predators for rabbits. And as we all know, rabbits are very, very aggressive when it comes to having offspring. They were first introduced in 1788, and they were bred as food animals, most likely in cages, but of course, as I said, they were let out for hunting. In the first couple decades of their introduction, they were in fact very much under control. In fact, it is said at that time that there were no rabbits throughout the Australian continent. In 1857 and 1858, Alexander Buchanan in mid North and South Australia was the individual who released rabbits for hunting sports. In the beginning, their population remained relatively stable. And in fact, up until 1866, which was a full decade later, it was still determined to be a population that was under control. Within a year, it was determined to have been out of control, and basically because rabbits became protected by an act of parliament, never really understanding what would happen to a population that didn't have enough of a predator species seeking them out. Population exploded, just absolutely exploded, to the point where farmers had an extremely difficult time maintaining crops. The rabbits now are considered to be a notorious pest. However, during the Great Depressions of 1890 and 1930, and of course also during wartime, they were viewed as a godsend because they were a food source for people that had very little. They really provided a way for people to provide food, extra income, and in some cases actually help pay off farming debts. Rabbits were fed to working dogs. They were boiled to be fed to poultry. Later, frozen rabbit carcasses were traded locally and exported. Pelts also for the fur trade, especially the felt hat industry, kind of a trend that was very popular. Initially, when the rabbits came to Australia, it was about 24 rabbits that came to Australia. We now know that just prior to 1870, they became a protected species by a government act. My question to you today, in the year 2022, from an initial 24 rabbits, how many rabbits are estimated to populate the continent of Australia? How many rabbits are estimated to populate the continent of Australia today? from an initial 2 dozen. There you have it, my friends. Those are our questions for the week. You know how to play the game. Get your answers to me by noon on Monday. I'll give you your name out on the airwaves next week. Also, if you want to get your name referenced in the show, send me an idea for a question. I give credit where credit is due. Jim Fry's been referenced a couple times. My own wife, Mary Beth, has been referenced a couple times on this show as having provided the questions that I end up asking. So that's another way to get referenced. I'd really like to thank you for spending the last half hour with me. I'd also like to thank the president of ECTV, Tyler Gudex. I'd like to thank the executive producer, Stacey Abbott. I'd like to thank my producer and editor, Scott McFerrin. I've said it many times, but it bears repeating. If there's anything you like about this show, Scott's fingerprints are all over it. Again, I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with me. I know you have lots of options on your television dial. I'm really, really glad you chose to take the time with me this last half hour. I also have one special announcement for you. This is Memorial Day weekend coming up. Monday is Memorial Day. For those of you that are regular shoppers at the Treasure Chest, I want you to know the Treasure Chest is closed this Monday. We're giving all of our volunteers the day off. Let them enjoy the holiday just like all of you. It's only the one day though. We'll be reopened next Friday and then things will continue as usual. So there you have it. I am your host and the Quizmaster, Mike Brever. As always, I ask you to remember those very, very famous words of the recently departed Betty White as we sign off our show this week. She was noted for saying and giving advice to people, I highly recommend you get 8 hours of beauty sleep every night. Unless, of course, you're ugly, in which case I recommend you get 9. So long, everybody. I'll see you next week, and have a great Memorial Day weekend. You're hot, you really shoot your shot.